purpose of this presentation, this event, is to learn how to turn your story into a story. And I'll explain kind of what that means. But we have a lot of people in the group, and this is for the Life is a Trip group for anybody who's not in the group and finding this some other way. That we have a lot of people with kind of what I call accounts of their reincarnation experience, some sort of memory, or maybe it's a regression or a dream. I call them a dreamery, something where they are, they've got kind of like, okay, this is what happened. This is what I remember. And it's a part of a story. And so I want to turn them into a story. And so that's kind of the purpose of this presentation, is to talk about, well, how do you turn a story into a story so that we can put it on our podcast? So, of course, it's about the Life is a Trip podcast. It's now up and live. I don't know how many of y'all have had a chance to listen to any of the episodes, but we're getting some really good feedback and very excited about that. And it's available on Spotify and Apple and YouTube and, some other podcast places. And some of you that are watching this and listening to this might want to take a story, or take, a story and turn it into a story, basically, so that we can put it on the podcast. And one of the reasons, just to give a bigger picture of this, is I've written a number of reincarnation stories, novels, children's books, screenplays, all of the above. And I really have seen how these kinds of stories can change the world. And so what I want to do is just get more stories out there. I've got a new series of novels coming out in September that I'm very excited about. And I've got another short story coming out in a week or so. And I just want more people and more stories. I just think the more stories we have out there, the more exciting the world will be. And they're fun and they're interesting and they open up people's hearts and minds. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is they can be fictional or factual, right? So it doesn't have to be something, oh, I can prove I was this person, or I can prove this actually happened. It's just got to be a good story, is kind of the motto. Just to give a clear, these are some of this is who I am. This story, The End, is coming out in a few weeks, or maybe a week. And I'm going to offer it for free so everybody can read it. It's about 9,000 words, so it's not like a huge novel or anything. But it's funny because people have told me they think that it could be a college course just on its own as a short story. So it's got a lot of depth to it and a lot of opportunity for discussion. And Carol and I've talked about maybe doing some sort of discussion group on it. And so we may end up doing that. And then I've got the novels that I call We Meet Again, and this is what they're going to look like. So just to give you a little idea about me. And so what we're going to do is talk about more about turning an account into a story. We're going to look at themes and plots and characters, what will make it interesting and entertaining, how do you balance description and plot, and don't be afraid to embellish. It's more important to be entertaining than accurate. So, when I say fictional or factual, doesn't matter. I love this little meme about, I made it mission to unteach children that fiction is fake. I have had some profound responses to my novels of people saying, wow, this just changed my whole life. And I really think the fact that it's written in fiction often can be more powerful because people can suspend their disbelief. So that's one of the ideas, is it can be fiction, or you can take a story that it's partially true and you can kind of fictionalize it any way you want. So I just like that little meme. And so, some people may have a recollection of living in the Middle Ages, or a farm in Bohemia, or in the Moravian Empire, or, an African community, or just maybe you've met somebody that feels familiar. So there's a beginning of a story, a beginning of an idea, a place, a person, place, or situation. But right now it's just kind of an account, a fragment, or a beginning of a story. And so, or maybe it's just an idea for a fictional story you can tell. I actually outlined a TV series that I pitched to Hollywood that I'm hoping to pitch again someday. And I outlined several hundred episodes. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of stories potentially to tell that are all very different. And that's what I want to see. So how do you turn an idea into a tale, a captivating tale? And so we're going to look at characters, plot, theme, and conflict. So what are the elements of story? It's character, it's theme, it's plot, and it's conflict. So let's look at the character, because if you're writing this, and let's say you're writing a story about yourself, and like, okay, for example, I had a past life with an old boyfriend, and I had very clear memories of like who I was, who he was, and why we were there, how old we were, kind of where we were, and how I died in that lifetime. But that's not really a story, right? I have to turn it into characters like, who was I? I happened to be a teenage boy in Belgium in the 1800s. But who really was I, and what was my motive, and what were my character goals? I like to look at the fear, desire, and misbelief of characters. I learned that from Abby Emmons, who does great YouTube videos. I like to look at Enneagrams to see what type of Enneagram and what personality. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then, is there a character arc? And, we all know a really good story is one where it's got a beginning, middle, and end. And usually something changes at the end. Um, Usually it's the character, right? So like you can go, if you listen to my story, The Dreamery, on the podcast, you'll see, okay, there was a character having problems with his marriage, and his wife was worried about him. And so we see his before picture, which is, having kind of these issues, but having these weird dreams. And then all of a sudden he realized something about himself. It was able to bring out something in him for to improve his marriage, because he remembered who he was and remembered this part of himself that brought him back to life. So does the character change in the story? And I think we all know from our experience with reincarnation stories that a lot of times it does, right? So that's really a big thing. And then you kind of always have to have conflicts and obstacles, right? It can't be like, woke up, I feel better, I just had a dream and now I remember I was so and so and everything's fine. There's usually some sort of obstacle in the way, whether they don't want to know what their past was, or they don't want to remember their previous death, or there's somebody against them who thinks they're crazy, but it's always good to have kind of a conflict, an obstacle in a story. So I'm going to just show you a little bit about an Enneagram, and I'm going to put in the group a link to this particular website that I find extremely helpful when you're looking at a specific kind of Enneagram. And if you don't know about Enneagrams, there are 9 basic Enneagrams, but they each have a wing. So like if you're a number 9, you could be a wing 1, or you could be a wing 8. And this particular one is a 7 with a wing 6, and they call them the Pathfinder. So you can automatically, just hearing the name Pathfinder, you can go, well, that's a character that's really going to blaze some trails and have some, kind of specific type of personality. They're going to be enthusiastic, responsible, adventurous. They're going to blaze new trails, kind of thing. And so that's what this particular website will show you, looking at an Enneagram. So if you're writing your story, it helps to find your own, if it's your own story, but also the Enneagrams of your characters. And this particular website will actually let you do a quiz where you can take the quiz as your character. What do you think your character would answer the questions? So it really helps a lot. And it also helps a lot if you've got, let's say you've got this particular Enneagram, it's the Pathfinder, super blazing trails, but then you'll have somebody else who're like, no, I'm the cautious one. You better dot your I's and cross your T's, and you better be ready. So that's good source of conflict, is you see somebody who's say, okay, be careful here. And then we can look at their fears, because everybody's got a different kind of fear. It just depends on, kind of their personality type. So you would have, for example, the 7 with a 6 wing has a fear of missing out. Like they're looking at everything that's going on. I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. And they have to kind of make a decision and get disciplined to make a decision, because they don't want to miss out. And so but they also kind of want to like not over plan, because there's something new that might, they're kind of like the shiny object, or like the squirrel looking at whatever the next thing is coming. And then they have a desire to feel fulfilled and happy. Of course, we all do, but in kind of different ways. And then they will defend themselves by rationalizing away negative feelings. So they're not the people you come to with, red flags and Debbie Downers. So this is just an example to help you when you're writing a story to understand who the character is. So, because I'm sure we all know stories that we've seen or watched or read, and we get hooked into the character. Like, we want to know what's going on with this character. The story that I'm launching next week, called The End, there's these 2 characters, and it's from the point of view of I call the upstairs. and they're like, how do we get these characters together? How do we get these people together? This couple needs to be together. And so the reader is going, I want them to be together too. So you got to get them engaged with who the characters are. And then themes, and I just did a kind of a screen capture of a whole bunch of themes. It could be all kinds of things. It could be, of course, immortality and rebirth are big reincarnation themes, but it could be something about aging or fear of death, or maybe it's a prejudice thing. And I think one of the things I love about reincarnation is that when we find out that we could have been any race in any other lifetime or any nationality or any age or any, religion or anything. And then, if we have a prejudice in this lifetime, then what do we do when we find out, oh my gosh, the people I'm against now, I was in the prior lifetime. Like, it changes your whole perspective of all of those kinds of judgments. So that's a really great theme to use. But this is a whole list of themes, and I've got a whole bigger, longer list, but you want to have some sort of theme. So, like the story, The Dreamery, that I wrote that's on the podcast, one of the themes is like, what's the breakdown in marriage? What's the difference in gender roles from the past till now? And how does that affect us today? And how does that affect relationships? And it's just also a really fun story, so that's kind of one of the goals here. And then I mentioned Abby Emmons, and as I said, I love her podcast. I mean, her YouTube channel. And I love this quote from her. She said, "Plot is what happens. Story is why what happens matters." Right. So it's one thing to go, oh, I had this past life with this old boyfriend, and I found out I was his older brother, and I died trying to save the village. Okay. But does that matter? No, it matters because you care about the character and how the character is trying to challenge themselves and all this kind of stuff. So and it looks like I've got something in chat. So I'm going to try to go to chat just to see if there's any questions. We just got some nice to meet yous. Okay. So I will share that list again with you. But I love this idea. Like, why does it matter? Why will it matter to the reader? I think a lot of you might have read someone's story in the group the other day about losing his husband. And it was just such a beautiful story. We cared so much about him. And so, like, okay, he hooked us into caring about this husband that he lost and that he misses so much, and wonders whether he's going to see him again on the other side or in another life, or has known him before, or will know him again, that kind of thing. So it matters, right? And then we start caring. So I want to talk about, like, okay, we know this instinctively probably, but this is really kind of the structure of a story. And it starts with an opening. And so you go, okay, this person, walked into a room and we saw their expression, or we give them a little backstory, and we tell you a little bit about the characters, and we kind of give you a little hint of where they are in this thing. In The Dreamery, I started out with two women talking about one of the women's relationship. And so we get an idea of who they are and what matters to them. And then there's something that changes, like some inciting incident that changes what's going on. Now, with a reincarnation story, maybe it's going to a regression therapist. Maybe it's doing a self-regression. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's, oh my God, I just ran into somebody and I know I knew that before. I got to figure this out. Maybe it's, I've got this problem and the problem gets worse and worse and worse. And it's maybe a medical issue or some sort of emotional issue. And you just know it's tied to a previous lifetime. So there's the inciting incident. Something has to happen that shakes the person out of their, what they call the ordinary world, right? You're just plodding along your life, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens to get you to change. And I'm guessing we all know what that's like. And then there's some sort of rising action, like it gets more and more. And usually, if you know the hero's journey, the hero's, like, they call it refusal of the call, like, not going there. Going to try to remember my lifetime, or I'm not going to face this issue that I have to face. And they keep denying it until it's a huge obstacle, or they have somebody pushing them in the way to, like, you got to do this. It's going to get worse until it gets better. You've got to solve, look into this situation. And then there's some sort of climax where it all comes to a head, and that, like, whoa, all the parties, all the energy, all the revelations come together. And then, of course, there's something that's different at the end. So it's a pretty simple structure of just who are these people? Something happens to get them to change the world. How does that affect them? How are they fighting against it? Who are they fighting against? And then boom, it could be the epic battle scene. It could be just like, you finally look at that person, like, you can write a really romantic story and like, oh, I just remembered, I know who you are, and I remember being married to you and what our lifetime was like. And you could make it funny and go, and I'm not doing that again. Or it could be like, no, no, this is it. This is the real love. I know, they call it a soulmate love, although I personally define a soulmate as just somebody you were destined to meet. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a love relationship or marriage or anything. Sometimes it could be, the reason, season, or lifetime thing. But that's really basically kind of the elements of a story. And so it opens, and I'm just going to kind of repeat that, but introduce the main characters and what their ordinary world is, kind of give an idea of what their fears, desires, and misbeliefs are. Like you can just really quickly get an idea of the character. And I'm hopefully going to be able to play a video for you to see an example of that. It's not a reincarnation story, but it's such a simple little story for you to see all of the stuff happening within 4 minutes of a story. Then you have the incident, like I said, inciting incident, something that takes the character out of their comfort zone. Then the rising action, who are the people and things that block their plans? They think they're going here, but man, like I was describing guides as like border collies sometimes, like we're going down a path and they'll just keep hitting us until we go down another road. So what are those kinds of obstacles that can get in our way? Then the climax, like something you or the character didn't expect. I'm a big fan of irony. So the more you can throw things in that the reader or the listener is not going to expect, the more they pay attention. Like, whoa, that's not what I thought it was going to be at all. It makes the story even more interesting, I think. And then change, like have they faced their fear or their desire or misbelief? Have they changed as a result? So this is what I'm going to try to, I'm going to try to play this video, and I'm going to try to get the sound. So bear. Okay, let me turn off. Okay, are y'all with me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. But does anybody? I think most of y'all are off mute. Well, a couple of you aren't, but if you want to unmute, does anybody want to add a comment about that before I talk about the story?
I have a question. How are those graphics generated?
I don't know exactly, but I know it was done by a young person, like a teenager in Germany, and he won so many awards that he was hired by Pixar.
Hmm.
So it's a great story. I don't know how he did it. I don't know what program or whatever, but I love the story behind the story, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and go back to this. And so now we saw the present. So now, if you can think about that, like who was the main character and what were their fears, desires, and misbeliefs? Does anybody want to jump in and say anything?
That was really cute. Obviously, the boy had a missing leg, and his mother wanted him to feel okay about himself, so she got him a pet. And initially, the boy was disdainful because the kid looked crippled, showing how he felt about himself. And then he came to love the little dog. So beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And so at first he was like, I've just got to separate myself from the world. I'm not going to go out and play. I'm just going to immerse myself in my escapism with video games, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of what we found at the beginning. And then the inciting incident, of course, was when the mother brought the box, the present, and then that took the character out of their comfort zone, right? They had to look at it, they had to pay attention. And first they were excited, and then they were like, no, then they were disdainful, as you said. And then the blocks or obstacles, like he wanted to play with the dog, but he didn't want to play with the dog. He was, paying attention, but he was afraid of that kind of that block. So all of his blocks in this story were, of course, internal, and his own kind of self perception, if you will. And then the climax is like, okay, we're getting something. What happened that you didn't expect? And of course, if you're like me, you didn't expect the fact that the main character was also disabled and missing part of a limb. And that was like, okay, now we understand why he was the way he was, and we can see how this dog was able to bring him, out. And then of
Mm.
course, they faced their fear, desire, and misbelief, and they changed as a result. He went out and played with the dog. So I just think that's a really lovely story to kind of, explain and show these things that are really basic elements of a story in a very, very short period of time.
Mm.
And even though it didn't really feel rushed, right? It told a complete story very quickly. Yet it was also complete, and it wasn't like we just moved too fast between the lines. So, the next thing we're going to talk about is for, anybody watching this or any of you guys on with me is, well, what is your reincarnation or past life story? And I'm just going to kind of give an example of one. Um, you know, there might be something where what is the character's life before they even heard about past lives, or they started recalling a past life, or they started met somebody that they know they knew before. There's always some sort of inciting incident that makes them face this reality, right? And of course, the more they're opposed to the idea of reincarnation, the more dramatic it is, because then they're going to start opening their mind and realizing something like that. Um, the inciting incident, maybe it's the memory coming forth, right? All of a sudden you're like, okay, this just, I met somebody and I can't stop thinking about them, or I was in this location traveling and all of a sudden I see this place and I know I was there before. And I don't know if you've seen the clip from the Patton movie with George C. Scott, and there's a part where he's like, I was here before. I was at this battle. I remember these people fighting. I mean, it was a whole huge memory coming forth. And of course, Patton was very well known as a big reincarnation believer. In fact, he wrote a beautiful poem about it. So the rising obstacles, well, how does that memory force them to look at life differently? And one of the stories that I wrote is they were like, I'm not, they brought up very, very religious, and they're like, I'm not going down that road of reincarnation. No way am I going to challenge my belief system on that. But it could be all kinds of things. It could be somebody in their family. It could be that there's maybe their memory is one that is not necessarily pleasant that they have to kind of confront. Um, the climax, they face that fear, they face it, and they find out, and they go, wait a minute, I just realized that the reason I've had back pain is because I was stabbed in the back in a previous lifetime. And now that I remember it and I can process it and learn from it, I can move on. And of course, that's the last part is, they or the world around them changes as a result. There are other ways to tell a reincarnation story, of course. The person with the memory is not the protagonist. So it could be like, okay, you're just going around in a relationship. All of a sudden, this other person says, oh, I've known you before. Like, how do you handle that if you don't believe? Or if you're the main character doesn't believe, but somebody else tries to get them. And so what's the reaction kind of person? Um, there could be a fictional story tracing past lives. I've always thought it would be really interesting to take uh, a well-known, historical, like let's just say Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. Might they have been in a previous lifetime, or who that might they be now? There's just endless possibilities of taking fictional characters and looking at who they might have been or who they might be now. Um, those stories are rewritten all the time, but they're never rewritten from that perspective that I've seen. That if you've listened to the podcast, you'll hear that there is some of them are read by actors. So they're read like they started out as a short film script, and we had a group of brilliant professional actors reading those stories. And then some of them are short stories, and many of them are either read by the writer or by an actor who volunteered. The short film scripts need to be under 20 pages, which is under 20 minutes. The short stories, generally 1,000 to 3,000 words. If you have something that's less or more, we can talk about it because it might still be such a great story. It's worth putting on the podcast. And so, go again, looking at your story, what are the elements of a story and what's going to change? And then we do have, the different stories. I only put a few of them here, but there are some really great stories on the podcast. And So I was going to ask, like if who here, I'm going to I'm going to kind of minimize this and try to get stop sharing right now. But who has listened to any of the stories that are on the podcast that might give an idea, like who they think the inciting incident was, or how did the character change, or whatever? Does anybody have anything they want to kind of add in there that they think might have been one of the stories if you listen to them? No, not yet. Okay. Well, we're early. We officially launched yesterday, so it is really early. But we are going to we did kind of come out a few days earlier on those stories. And I just hope everybody listens. But now I'm open after questions. Anybody have any questions or anything they want to ask me?
No, this was really fabulous. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this. As a hypnotherapist, to me, it's important to be able to give a little guidance to clients who have this kind of interest, even in journaling, because sometimes that's a way for them to process. Some leave my office literally like deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh, or by Zoom, I should say also, that even though they think they're ready, they think they know, they think it's like going to be an easy piece of cake. Journaling and these kinds of directions would be really super helpful. Will you put the link to this on the page?
I will put it in the group. I'm also going to put it
Thank
on
you.
our on the Life is a Trip page
Thank
group, as well as it's the website there. I'm also going to put it on the YouTube channel on the Life is a Trip. So I'm going to put it all kinds of places. Even though I've got a few blips in here, I think we're okay.
you.
And just so I want to be able to share this, and I'd like to do it again. In a few weeks, so that we can have more interaction as well. So this won't necessarily be the only time I'm doing it, but I just figured we'd at least get it started. We do have a really good feeling about how big this could be. And
Mhm.
so we may end up having lots and lots and lots and lots of people applying. We haven't set up a new contest yet, and we have enough stories to take us through August 27th or through mid-August. But that's not that far away.
Right.
So we will be looking for more stories, and the ones we have are, what I love about them is they're so different. I mean, some are funny, some are heart-wrenching, some are just kind of whimsical. Some of them are, well, like, oh, like deer in the headlights. I'm listening to this or reading this, and it's like so powerful. So lots of different kinds of stories. So the more different kinds of stories we can have, and the more we can get these stories out there, and as much as y'all can help me get it out in the world, and get people to watch and share and like and give reviews and all those kinds of things, the more it helps more of these stories thrive. And that's really what I
Awesome.
want to do.